Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Pete on the Penny University 2301 class, Unit 4. And yeah, I was kind of going over this and looking at different things to talk about, and talked about one of the main things is polling, right? And while polling can be important at times, there's a lot of issues with polling at current, right? So we see this real big divide in the United States currently, and there's all these things going on, right? But we have polling that keeps coming up like, well, X number of people don't like this, they don't, or they support this, they don't. And at the end of the day, what's interesting is there's different types of polling, right? Especially like with voters. We have voting, like what would you as a citizen or just you as a respondent want? As a citizen, as a voter, as a likely voter. And so what's interesting is as you get more narrow who's really going to vote or not, then all of a sudden it starts shifting all these polls, right? Another thing too is in the polling world, that could be very subjective, right? So there's all this bias that is inherent. A lot of like you might ask a question two different ways and get completely different percents. The reason I talk about that stuff is that we see, in the overview, it talks about like, hey, how can you do this for strategic vote? Maybe moving an election, bandwagon effect, all these things, right? But at the end of the day, it's very hard to know what's working, what's not. A lot of times, political parties get down to brass tacks with some of their polls, and they'll sit there and they have internal polls, right? Sometimes they release them, oftentimes they don't, because those really get down to like focus groups, like very motivated, dedicated people, or like give us real feedback, right? And it's kind of like if you went to a product tasting or something, or a movie review, and they say, okay, tell us what you think about this trailer. Or what do you think about this food? What could we do better? What do you like? What do you don't like? And it's similar to that, right? So it's very, very focused in, and it gives those political parties a lot of information. We see polling all the time. Sometimes, for example, where I live, we have a Nelson County Overwatch, and they'll have a poll like, "Hey, community, what do you support? Would you support this, that, whatever?" But it's not really very statistical, or if you will, valid, or has rigor or validity to it, right? Meaning it's just something that whoever happens to see it that day votes, and they may not like this, or you might have a pocket of people that like it, but the vast majority of people aren't going to say anything because then their vote's made public and they might not like that. So there's all these things, right? And there's also a bias in polling that the people who actually pick up their phone to take the polling or answer the email are very select few people, right? So that can skew polls. There's a lot of bias that way. There's also phenomenons where people will say what they think needs to be heard. Well, yeah, I agree with this policy because blah, 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 right? Not because they really agree. They just don't want other people thinking they're a bad person, right? It's kind of like if your boss came up to you and said, hey, Dr. Pete, I just wrote this course, or I just had this initiative, or I'm going to have this new policy. What do you think? Well, what am I supposed to think? Am I supposed to say, oh yeah, I'm real and I'm keeping it, or do I sit there and go, well, I don't know about this. I'll just say what the boss wants, right? And we see this everywhere. You see it even when I was in the military agency, all that. So sometimes you get yes people, they call yes men, yes people, and that can also skew things as well, even if it's smaller, like samplings, right? So when you read all this, there has been more of a turning off of the polling data. A lot of people call it fake or selective, or they look at the people doing it and they go, "Ah, that's biased." So a lot of people really don't take it for what it's worth. If you like the result, you accept it. If you don't, you just look at it and discredit it, right? So we see a lot of that as well. We talk about, and then it goes into the media's influence on the public opinion, but the main thing in my mind is the changing face of political news is there's a thing that used to be called mainstream media, like you would say the big like CBS News, NBC, ABC, Walter Cronkites. They had a way of presenting the news in a more professional way. It wasn't so much they were in the story, they were reporting the news. But even then, they had their bias and they filtered it. They couldn't report everything, right? So there was still a bias there and a prejudice, but at least there was an air of impartiality to a degree. It wasn't about Walter Cronkite. It was about the news itself, and it was presented more like 60 Minutes used to be decades ago. They say, "Here's the issue," click, 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 and the timer's going around, and And it was just a lot more, at least an appearance that there might not be as much bias, and is more professionally done. And it was a journalist was a professional, not the source of the inform like the article or the discussion or the interview wasn't about them. It was about what they found, like the data and the information and news, right? So that changed a little bit. But what really shifted things is the advent of the technology. So if we go back and we say, okay, well, how did people initially communicate, say, in the colonies or in the United States? We see a lot of word to word, if you will, mouth to mouth. Uh, we saw this a lot in churches. Churches would be a place of updating people on current events and news, and the local feed store, or if you will, tax store, some general store. That was a source of information. People wrote letters. So that was very slow. You had people that would travel. You always will. If you go back and read about politics, you'll see people talking about, well, they did a train tour and they would stop in a station, come to the side of the train and start talking and do their speech and whatever grandstand, and it was kind of interesting, right? Or they might go to a public area and talk. You would have people talking, we and then of course as technology developed, you had the people would copy things and write them and share them and speak about them. But then there was the newspaper, the printing press came along, and that became a whole nother deal, So now we started having a little bit more mass production, if you will. More people would have access to it. It became a little cheaper. You could, get a printing press and just rattle out a bunch of leaflets, that like one page or a couple pages at most, but normally one page leaflets giving out a bunch of information. So just keep going forward, right? Then we got the radio, then we got the television, now we got the internet, now we got social media. All these things kind of develop along, and it gives a lot more platforms to more people. So one can go on Facebook or Instagram and have a whole channel, followers, whatever. Some have more, some have less. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that can be, the technology is what's driving it, right? We also have changes in the mainstream media, because, for example, as radio kind of lost its weight and television took over, but then there was the AM radio thing, like with people like Rush Limbaugh. That was a big movement into journalism, or at least entertainment journalism, if you will. And so that became a whole nother thing, right? And then you have public access TV, mainstream TV, then you had cable TV, right? Then you have private networks now. And so there's all these other things that are moving in, like you have Sirius radio. So radio's not only AM, FM, but Sirius, or different ones, XM radio type things. And then you got TV, and it's branched everywhere. And then the internet used to be just the internet. Then it became websites that had specific goals or news or whatever. Then it broke into maybe even more specific groups that talks only about certain political things, and then some that only certain slants of the politics. So you can really hone into whatever you want, right? So, but with that access comes a lot of things that can be distorted, right? It can be bias, prejudice, whatever, and that causes its own issues, right? So then, in this review here, it talks about yellow journalism. Some people call it yellow dog journalism, but talking, and it gives you the history here. What's interesting though, it kind of needs to go back to the 1700s, because there was several times where even with the founding fathers, one story I always remember was Jefferson was notorious for having, media, like he would set up like a newspaper, so to speak, and leaflets, and he would have basically fake news, or if you will, maybe just hyper, like hyperbolic, or if you will, very sensational news come out, and it was attacking the Federalists. He was an anti-Federalist, and I remember one story I was reading about that, and he had really done a hack job on a number of people, and one of them happened to be George Washington, right? So he and he was Washington's Secretary of State, and everyone kind of knew at some point he'd probably be president, and but it was just a question of Adams, and if Adams was there for a while, then maybe it was Jefferson. So, anyways, Jefferson comes into this party, and Washington locks eyes with him, and I always say he melts him right there in the door. Like Washington knew what he'd done, Jefferson knew what he'd done, and he couldn't. He was so ashamed at that moment. He got red faced, turned away, and was just ashamed because he realized what he did. There was some integrity, at least there. They knew he was wrong, but we fast forward over the decades, and we see. all these barrel, there's like some cartoon political pictures where there's barrels and of ink, and they would show how they could just make up stuff faster than anyone could stop it, right? So we see a lot of this. So when people criticize social media today, well, when did it really start? I mean, and it didn't start with the colonies in the United States. It went back. I mean, just as far as man goes, I'm assuming there was some form of fake or biased whatever news, right? But then the question is, who determines it's fake? Remember the attacks on the mainstream media was like, well, that's fine. You all are not the like they had this image of being journalists and there's this professional standard and it was about the news and there wasn't bias and we where we see both sides and we talk about it and if something's wrong we report it. Well, then it became about the journalist and then they became about their values, morals, and that's there's studies that show, and I'm not going to get into that, like where mainstream media journalists, what party they are basically part of and what ideology they believe, and it's not even close. It's very distorted, right? So you can go look that up yourself. But so what happens is you have all these people saying, well, this is fake news and social media. But then there's a lot of mainstream media that was shown to be false or biased or prejudiced. So what difference does it make, right? If you're going to make the news about you and your persona, your personality, or what your stick is, then why can't the average person do it, right? I mean, what's the difference at that point? Because it's not about really the news, it's about how you present the news and it's about how you cut the news to fit what you want, right? So that's something that I found interesting in some of the readings, and you can go through there and look at all that, and then the question is uh, how do we control that, right? So there's this big push to say, well, how do we control media, like in the sense of social and fake news, but then would that also apply to the mainstream media, the television, CBS, ABC, all the mainstream televisions? I mean, in other words, it's either all or nothing, right? And then the question is, how does that flow into the First Amendment of the United States? Do people just have a right to make up fake news? We have people who fake being veterans, and that's technically okay unless they gain money from it, right? So there's all this First Amendment thing that's going to come through the courts and all that. Plus, do we really want a government telling individuals, oh, by the way, this is what you have to do. You have to listen to this. You have to do this. Oh, by the way, we're going to figure out if this is fake or not, right? And think about the last couple of election cycles. Do you really trust? Doesn't matter which party you are, because we've had Biden and Trump, right? Do you, and some of you are going to say, well, I trust this one, I don't trust this one, or I trust the opposite. The point is, eventually someone that doesn't you don't agree with is going to be in charge of that. So do you want that? I always say, remember, if you give one president power, they're going to take it, the next president's going to take it and add to it, right? So if you sit there and say, well, I like this president, they can have that power, but not the next one. We don't like him. He or her. She doesn't. They don't get that. But it doesn't work that way, right? So once you let one person do it, set a precedent, then you're going to have to allow the other. So that's why I say instead of being political on these issues, people need to be more American on these issues and really try to figure that out. Because again, it's nice to have a president doing what you want and when you agree, but also remember, if you let him do that, the next one you don't agree is going to be doing something the opposite, and there's no way to stop it, right? And so, anyways, so you see all these things about the unit overviews, and uh, social media is a real big thing, and I think the main thing is really taking time to review media from the perspective, are you looking at things in order to confirm your bias? Are you looking at things to develop your mind? Are what are you using those things for, right? What are you using the internet for? Research, or confirm, but you got to be careful about confirmation bias. Like, I want to make this argument, so show me all the sources that support this. Well, maybe take a moment, and especially in government class, take a moment quietly and say, well, maybe let me look at the other side, because some of the best ways to make an argument is when you look at the other side, right? I think too is sometimes we don't put things, we think things, so we start thinking that's the way it should be, right? We've all seen this, we've all done it, where we sit there and say, well, I think this is the best way to do it, but there's really no evidence of it. Or the best part is we do something, the organization or people, company, school, whatever, changes it to something else, and then they want to go back to the thing that they started with, but because time flows and people forget, they forget that it failed here and they're doing the same thing again, and then they're going to come back around, right? It's kind of funny. And sometimes people just like changing things for the sake of changing them. So we have to kind of keep all that stuff in perspective with the internet too. The internet can be a wonderful tool, right? It can be an absolutely great tool, but it can also be a very devastating and negative tool. You know, people can be exploited um, in like financial crimes and sexual crimes, and just destroying their reputation. At the same time, it can be something like I have a friend who's a quadriplegic and he can't, obviously he can't move and he does things with his eyes and his mouth with the breath and he's on the internet. And so the internet allows him to have access to the whole world. Now he'll never get to go like on a trip. He'll always say that, Pete, I love when you go on trips to get to see pictures. So he can't see the pictures, like he can't go see the actual location, but he can see the pictures and visualize being there. So it opens up his world. So that the internet can be a really good thing, right? It's like AI. We're going to see that more and more in social media itself. Also, too, just anything in general. I was reading some brochures the other day, and I won't say which ones, but I was like, this is AI. And sure enough, I put it through the system. It's pure AI. And one of the reasons I noticed it was just so generic. It didn't have a lot of detail. It looked nice, it read nice, but it wasn't really personal. It was very flat and vague, and it was awful. I mean, from my perspective, But I was like, I mean, how much time would it have taken someone just to do the work, right? Maybe look up some facts with AI, right? But not write all the brochure, right? It was just kind of weird. But we're going to see that more with media, But you have to remember AI is just like an advanced program. All it's going to do is, there used to be an old expression, and people forget this or that never knew it. GIGO, GIGO, right? Garbage in, garbage out. An AI system is only good as much as the garbage going into it, the programmer who sets up the boundaries, and then what spits out the other side, right? So you can have garbage going in, garbage going out, good stuff going in, bad stuff going out, or you don't know, right? And so you have to be careful with AI because that's going to be what generates a lot of news in the future. And it's going to be something that helps to say, well, Pete is more this way, so we're going to send things that are edited and really focused on him, like these individual ads. And I'm gonna go, man, that's a really good ad, but it's only really for me and a few select people. Well, that's going to be something that really starts twisting the way we look at things. Is this real or not? Is that price only for me? Is it for everybody? Are so there's all these things going on. Is that media article true, or is it just saying things that reflect what I want to see, right? And then somehow I get on their website and pay money or add revenues and all that. So the key here is really to take your time and really pay attention to how those things work and how the media it's just a continuation just by different technologies, right? And it's nothing new. I mean, everyone pretends like this is the new thing, but it's just nothing new. It's been going on since the beginning of the country, right? So we have to kind of put all these things in perspective, and I think that's a good place to kind of end this and make the most of your education here so you can try to say, okay, I understand bias, prejudice, I understand what's a good source, not a good source, things. I know how to have an open mind and think through things as well, right? I appreciate it and best of luck.